Welcome to the Media Roundtable, where we believe that content can be entertaining and informative and profitable while doing some good in the world. We're bringing together industry voices and organizational leaders to discuss and workshop how this plays out in real life. I'm your host, Dan Granger, and today we are joined by Ciaran O'Connor. Ciaran is the Chief Marketing Officer at Braver Angels. Braver Angels was founded in 2016 after the election in an effort to bridge our divided country. Welcome to the show, Ciaran.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So your bio is fascinating to me. Let me start with this. Duke University, New York City homicide investigations, The New Yorker, writing for Obama, writing for Hillary Clinton, and then Braver Angels. Can you connect some of the dots on how you went from that kind of background to what you're doing today?
Sure. Yeah. Homicide Investigations Unit. You went deep on my resume. That was an internship I did between 10th and 11th grade. And they stuck me right into the fire. I was helping the seasoned investigators with some of their investigations. That was under the last year of Robert Morgenthau, the legendary DA of New York. But more recently, I graduated college, went to work on the Obama campaign in 2012. I'd long been inspired by Barack Obama. He was the reason that I got into politics in the first place. We ended up winning the election, which basically meant that my first job in politics was the zenith of my political career. It made me think politics is awesome. In some ways, it's been all downhill from there. I worked on the Hillary campaign in 2016, so I've known both the thrill of victory and the anguish of defeat. After the 2016 election, I was considering jumping back on another Democratic campaign, but I was really increasingly troubled by the deeper divides in our country. Things had gotten to the point where people no longer viewed their political opponents as simply wrong or misguided or misinformed, but increasingly viewed them as bad people, contemptuous people, people who were utterly worthless, people who were a threat to all of our values. And that's not to say that politics is or should be about being nice or being civil or being polite. There's a reason there's a lot of war metaphors in politics. It's a competitive sport. We have deep disagreements in this country. That's the way it's supposed to be. But we're no longer playing on the field. We're basically trying to blow up each other's tour buses before we even take the field, I think is an apt metaphor. So I was really troubled by that, and I wanted to find a way to work on this underlying problem, this problem that was fueling so much gridlock, so much heart sickness in the country. And so I got involved with then named Better Angels right at the beginning, to help tell the story of the organization and to help give Americans an opportunity to talk across enemy lines, to build relationships, and to develop a model for our politics and our political culture that can hopefully change norms and incentivize behavior both within communities and within the political class, that can make for a healthier political culture and a revitalized social fabric, and one that can help us make progress on the enormous challenges that are facing America.
Do most people that you know believe this is an achievable goal, or do people tell you you're dreaming all the time and it would be possible if the side that they disagree with would change, but they won't, so no progress can be made?
Well, the headwinds are certainly stiff, but every social movement that seeks to fundamentally change the direction of the nation is facing an uphill battle. So idealists, and some might call us Pollyannish, but people who are drawn to an ideal that seems out of reach are drawn to Braver Angels because we're actually working on the problem. I mean, so much of the anguish and the rancor that we see just breeds this kind of helpless anger where you're mad at the other side, you know something's wrong, but all you're really doing is scrolling through Twitter or watching Sean Hannity or Rachel Maddow, take your pick, not to necessarily equate them, but the two cable news shows, the websites, the echo chambers, all of this leads to a political experience where you might be really well informed, but you're going to be angry, and your opinion of those you disagree with is going to be informed by tribal stereotypes, not by real relationships with people, whether they're in your own family or your community, or your state or your country. And so we certainly have seen the positive change that we've brought to people's lives and to people's relationships and to people's relationship with the country as a citizen. The question, and the one that I'm constantly seeking to answer, is how can we scale that? How can we become an organization like the NRA or the Sierra Club or AARP? I read a study that said in order to truly influence the direction of the country, you need to activate at least 1% of the population. So it's about 3 million. We've got about 15,000 members now. How do we get to 3 million?
I love it. I love it. You've made it a SMART goal. That's very helpful. So, okay, let's play it forward a little bit. Let's imagine there were no Braver Angels or the kind of ally organizations that are in this struggle, pushing in the same direction. What is at stake for the country if we don't change course?
Well, I think we've seen the consequences of worsening political division, and they're violent. You look at what happened on January 6th, you look at the increased level of political violence, and furthermore, you look at the extent to which partisans are willing to tolerate or excuse violence in the name of political victory. Those numbers have shot way up. And just from history throughout the world, or America, or recent history, we know what happens when that sort of violent rhetoric morphs into violent action. And our approach is bred originally from couples therapy. The original Red Blue Workshop was designed by a family therapist who specializes in helping couples who are on the brink of divorce, essentially who want to take one last stab at saving their marriage, helping them communicate, better understand each other's perspectives, and rebuild some of the trust that's needed to have a functioning relationship. Some couples, though, should get divorced, right? I mean, at the end of the day, not every couple should stay together. The problem is the United States can't really have a civic divorce. You know, it's not like the red states could go one way and the blue states could go one way. I mean, we're all living together within the same communities, the same families, the same country. So a civic divorce is kind of a civil war. And I think that's something that almost everyone wants to avoid. And so the question then becomes, what is the alternative path? And I think here is where things get interesting, because I think there's a real difference between polarization at the elite level, polarization of political parties. What does hyperpartisanship mean for what can get done in Congress? And I think some people will make an understandable argument that actually sometimes you do want to be completely partisan, and that in today's structure, that's how you get things done. I think that's a reasonable argument. But affective polarization, the feeling, again, that my political opponent is not just wrong and needs to be beaten at the ballot box, but it is somebody who is fundamentally dangerous and needs to be vanquished and defeated at all costs. That sort of polarization is harmful to our relationships, to our ability to work together on problems, and frankly, to our mental health. And so we are trying to illuminate a path forward that gives people an opportunity to understand and work with one another without feeling like they need to compromise their values or become a centrist. We want the polarized. We want hardcore Tea Party Trump supporters. We want hardcore social justice activists. We don't want people to feel like they need to give an inch when it comes to their core values, but we want to help people operate in good faith. And we've developed the structure and the method and the model and the container that helps people do that, because at the end of the day, we are all human beings. And when given the right ways to interact, that's how love can triumph over fear.
It's beautiful. With Donald Trump, we know that things got a little worse in terms of polarization. Post the Biden inauguration, do you think the problem is getting better?
It's an interesting question. I think things in general, in terms of the general atmosphere in sort of the mainstream political environment, feel a little bit calmer. I think this is, regardless of how you feel about Biden, I think most people would agree that he's a little more low key than Donald
Perhaps.
Trump. I think he's making a real conscious effort to stay above the fray, to keep focused on his agenda, to not be, obviously tweeting out insults left and right. And so I think just the pure frenetic chaos of the Trump administration that made people feel like they had to think and breathe politics all the time, that kind of elevates your blood pressure.
Yeah,
I feel like that's gone down a little bit. But the fundamental divisions in our country are growing. I think recent polls show 70% of Republicans think the election was stolen. If you feel that the president is illegitimate and your government is illegitimate, there is a logical argument there that you should rise up against the government and against the oppressors, because you are the true Democrat in small d terms, right? And so we have essentially in this country tens of millions of Americans who are accusing their fellow Americans of purposefully trying to undermine democracy and their rights. And that's a dangerous thing. And I think we could continue to see violence unless we're really able to make progress on this deeper issue of social trust and trust in each other and institutions. Because when you don't trust sources of information, you don't trust institutions, and you don't trust your neighbor, that's when you are vulnerable to believing in conspiracy theories. And that's where you find meaning and identity in dangerous tribalism.
for sure. Now, when you were talking about the 1% is fascinating, and so that's a very specific goal to try to reach. What are the other metrics that you look at to see how effective Braver Angels is at achieving its mission? What are the ways that we can measure?
I think we also measure the level of engagement among our people, right? So there are people who listen to our podcast. There are people who are on our email list. But there are also people who are out organizing in their communities and becoming leaders in the work. Braver Angels is a highly decentralized and grassroots, bottom-up, volunteer-led organization, as I think have been most of the successful social movements in history. It's not like a lot of highly paid staffers in headquarters in New York City are going to be able to change the country in the way that millions of ordinary people working on their relationships and communities are going to do that. And so we measure a lot of our success in terms of volunteer engagement. And a lot of that is channeled through Braver Angels alliances. A Braver Angels alliance is essentially, a roughly even number of reds and blues, as we call them, conservatives and liberals, Republicans and Democrats, who work together and meet together in their community to continue spreading workshops, to take up issues of common concern. And eventually, over time, as we build our grassroots muscle, that's when we can more impactfully influence institutions, be it the media, be it the partisan media complex that I know you think about a lot at the Media Roundtable, be it academia, a place where free debate has come under fire, many folks would say, and a place where people feel like they don't really have a way to talk about politics in a healthy way. And one of the things we've been doing is partnering with universities across the country to give students a place to debate politics in a way that they can make their voice heard with passion and vigor, but to do so in a way that's more of a shared pursuit of truth than a common debate as people have been conditioned to understand it, where the goal is to humiliate your opponent. And the ultimate institution, of course, is that of politics itself. And as we build enough grassroots muscle, that's how we begin to change incentives for politicians. And that's how you ultimately begin to change behavior that can then be modeled back to the grassroots. So ideally there you create a virtuous cycle between individuals and institutions that can sort of rebuild the trust needed to reduce polarization effectively.
I imagine with all of these town halls and discussion groups, things can go sideways if they're not carefully planned and resourced. What do you do to equip the people that are facilitating or the groups themselves to keep them from going off the rails? Because there's so little good modeling for how to discuss differences in a way that doesn't become a bunch of personal attacks. What do you do?
It's a very good question. And again, the structure and the methodology of cross-partisan engagement is so key to its success, because you're right. I know if you just bring, a bunch of Trump supporters and a bunch of social justice activists together and say, debate immigration.
Have fun. Yeah.
Yeah. It not only will it be unproductive, it'll be counterproductive, and you will have done harm. So it's very important that there be guidelines, ground rules, guardrails that can be enforced by a moderator or a debate chair or someone who has been trained in how to do that. That's when it comes to, interactive programming. But a lot of what we do too is sort of develop educational tools that people can use to sort of absorb ways to, say, approach a political conversation in a productive way. And a lot of these things they're simple and they're sort of common sense, but because we're talking about politics, we've gotten so far away from them. I think the biggest, most important rule, if you are approaching a political conversation with someone you disagree with, if you want it to be a productive conversation, is to abandon the expectation that you're going to change their mind, because you're not. And we always just are conditioned to go into political conversations that we need to defend our position. We need to find a way to make the other person look stupid or ignorant or cruel. And we're not really listening to what they have to say. We're waiting to make our point. We're waiting to paint them into a corner. We're waiting to ascribe the worst characteristics of the politician they support to them and anyone like them. And we are looking to exaggerate and caricature the disagreements we have so that we're on the side of the righteous and they're on the side of the evil, essentially. And so we help develop tips and principles for having those conversations that make them productive. And it's not for everyone, right? I mean, again, this is sort of a coalition of the willing, but there is an appetite here for what we're doing because people recognize that the current environment is unhealthy and obviously unpleasant.
Yeah. So as you think about the total addressable market, I know you guys are looking at all the stats and research that's being done on the state of the nation in this. do most people actually want us to come together, or are most of them actually so energized by that conflict? I feel like we've become addicts in a way. Do you feel like more people actually prefer to see the other side as bad people? Or do most people want this? They just don't know how to get there, or they get carried away in the moment?
I think that's a good question. I think it depends on what the coming together is in service of, because I think a lot of people see compromise as selling out, right? Liberals will say, how can you compromise with a fascist? There's no
Right,
middle ground with a Nazi, to take the most
right,
extreme example. Or,
right.
people on the right will say, how can I compromise with people who support murdering millions of babies a year? And so I think people have put politics in such stark terms that they see coming together as sort of this compromise of fundamental values. But coming together can also mean maintaining and deepening the relationships that you care about, right? I mean, do you want to still have a relationship with your father who voted differently from you? Most people would say yes, and they want to find out how. To your point about how we've been addicted to conflict, I completely agree. But it's become what some people call high conflict or toxic conflict, where it's not conflict that leads to anything. It's conflict that just leads to more conflict. And so at at Braver Angels, our approach is to try to go through the conflict, not to try to avoid the conflict or go around the conflict, or get everyone together to just focus on where we agree, but to understand that we have these disagreements, and that's healthy, but we need to achieve accurate disagreement. We need to clarify what the disagreements actually are, because people have become addicted to the sort of conflictual framing of everything us versus them, because it's part of their identity, right? Your identity is that you are progressive, and that identity is formed in opposition to another tribe. And people feel like even engaging with the other tribe in any other manner than a pure zero-sum dominate or submit dynamic will somehow undermine their own identity. And they're fraternizing with the enemy. How could you even talk to that person, right? And that sort of attitude is very dangerous and also counterproductive, because it leads to groupthink, it leads to orthodoxy, it stifles creativity, and again, it destroys the relationships that make up the fabric of the country and upon which the democratic experiment is built.
It's interesting you say that. Even in doing this show, where we're trying to talk to people across the spectrum. We're trying to talk to hosts, we're trying to people that are actually in the field doing the work like you. And one of the things that happens is sometimes we get a chance to interview somebody that might be noteworthy or maybe contributing to the problem. And I ask myself, okay, are we actually going to help our mission or harm it, knowing that just putting somebody's name attached to the program, that people will judge that and make assumptions about why we did it, or not want to be involved because they don't want to sit in the same chair that somebody else sat in. So it's very interesting in that, in trying to do the work that we want to do, which I think is in the spirit of the work that you're doing, sometimes doing that work can actually move you backwards toward the goal. And the question I'm always asking myself is, do I worry about the scoreboard? Do I worry about the perception? Or do we just keep living our values and not worry about all that? How do you think about that? And maybe a very practical way to think about it is, you do your show, and you're having all these conversations. Are there people that you won't have a conversation with publicly?
It's a very interesting question, and it sort of cuts to the heart of this work. I can tell you an anecdote. We recently held a debate on voting, and some folks saw it as a debate about voter fraud. Other folks saw it as a debate about voter suppression. And other folks saw it as an opportunity to explain why they thought the election was stolen. And we got a lot of pushback from people that said, how can you debate whether the election is stolen? How can you debate someone who's, doesn't even subscribe to the same shared reality? And furthermore, isn't it dangerous to provide a platform, to people who would spread disinformation or misinformation?
Right.
And our response is, well, how else can that be combated? Or how else can we engage people who might believe in falsehoods? How else can we restore a shared epistemology without having a conversation? But again, it has to be a structured conversation. And that's why the structure of our container is so important, because there are things we don't allow. We don't allow ad hominem attacks. So I can't just come into a Braver Angels workshop and just, start calling you names
Right.
or, questioning your intention. But I can come into a Braver Angels workshop and start talking about why I think there's widespread voter fraud, which the evidence does not bear out. The reason that people believe in false information and conspiracy theories is not because they're stupid. It's because they don't trust accurate sources of information. So it becomes a question of, how are you going to build trust with people whose views you find not only inaccurate, but harmful and oppressive? And we believe the only way to do that is through engagement. Half the country is not just going to disappear. And due to the structure of our country, power will continue to be fairly evenly distributed. Even if Democrats can maintain, say, a hold on the presidency and both chambers of Congress, Republicans are going to control the majority of state legislatures, at least for the next 10 years, due to the fact that those districts were drawn. And furthermore, maybe you live in Manhattan or Los Angeles, you're a Democrat, you can go a year without talking to a Trump supporter. Most people don't have that luxury if you're a Democrat, right? You live with a family where you have deep political disagreements. Your workplace is divided. And so the idea that you can just ignore people or deplatform them, I think is needs to be challenged. That being said, I do think there are instances in which you can do a disservice. If you just give a sort of a big unchecked platform to someone who's going to spew disinformation, we've seen the negative consequences of that. We saw what happened when Donald Trump had a Twitter. I mean, he basically was able to spread such widespread misinformation that all sorts of people all around the country believe things that are not true. But we have a structure within Braver Angels where that information can be challenged in a way that it might actually be heard. Because again, it comes down to trust. If I trust Dan and Dan is making a point that's different from what I believe, I'm going to examine and listen to what Dan is saying a lot more closely than if I think Dan is trying to marginalize me or call me an idiot.
Yeah. By the way, these parameters that you have, I think, would be highly constructive. I'd like to see it, and I think a lot of other people would too. Is there something that we can link in the show for people to actually get your kind of guide sheet on facilitating a productive conversation?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the Braver Angels website, we have plenty of resources, materials, skills trainings. If you go to the Braver Angels YouTube, it's a pretty enormous public repository of past events. So you can actually go and watch, dozens of previous Braver Angels debates, a lot of which are on pretty hot topics, right? So we're having a debate about the 2020 election. We're having a debate about race in America, debates about Donald Trump. debates about hot button issues. And you can sort of understand how the way in which the debate is structured makes it a productive debate, rather than, the majority of the debates that we see online, which are not actually about debating your opponent. It's about showing your own side, that you're part of the team, right? I mean, that's who the audience for most of this performative stuff on social media is. It's people who already agree with you. And it's people who want to build their own brand by fanning the flames of division, which we've seen is incredibly effective.
I'm so, I obviously I love what you're doing with Braver Angels, but I love the fact that we get to talk to you, because this show is ultimately for marketers, and you are the chief marketing officer, marketing piece. You are marketing a really interesting product. What do you do in your role to market Braver
Well,
Angels?
I think a lot of the powerful part of marketing Braver Angels is storytelling, right? I mean, that's how we make meaning. That's how we find community, and that's how we form identity, is through stories and through seeing ourselves in other people and seeing that fellow humanity. And part of the problem with the political polarization is it's turned our fellow Americans into enemies. And so what we seek to do at Braver Angels is to try to tell the story, the rich tapestry of Americans who are different from one of us, but with whom we can see common values, and to lift up the relationships that have transcended political division, because that then spreads a more inspiring and hopeful narrative that can sort of trigger the human need for love, just the way the fear messaging can trigger the fight or flight, right? I mean, that's sort of a constant battle that's going on in humans. The other thing I would say when it comes to messaging at Braver Angels is, there's a reason that we're Braver Angels, right? We believe that it's not just about, empathy and compassion and respect, although those are all essential ingredients, but it's also about courage. Again, not just the courage you need to, take all the insults and invective that you're going to get from people who disagree with you, but also the courage that you need to withstand the judgment from your own side, who's, going to call you a sellout. And so we really try to emphasize that strength, so that people understand they can be their full selves. They can still be a partisan. They can still be an activist and an advocate while also being a Braver Angel. So that's what I would say from a messaging perspective. And then from the nitty gritty marketing perspective, one of our challenges is how do we do a lot with very little? We have a very small paid staff, and what we've tried to do is really harness volunteer energy. And thankfully, we've had all sorts of people with all sorts of incredible skills and experience and networks come to us and say, this is what America needs, right? Your mission is my mission. Let's make this our mission. And maintaining that kind of ethos is key to who we are, and I think has been key to our success. And I think it'll be an interesting challenge, both from a marketing and an internal culture. How do we maintain that ethos while growing? Because once you grow and start to scale, you also need to put in place new structures. You may need to try to professionalize in some areas, and sometimes that can kind of dampen the culture that makes you special. So I think that's one thing we're wrestling with as well.
Like every good band, you have to sell out a little bit to get to where you want to be, right? No, I understand. And so how do you use media to advance the mission?
Yeah, so we have our own media network. It's called Braver Angels Media. So we are constantly developing and releasing our own content and media products, whether that's the Braver Angels podcast, which I host along with sort of a rotating cast of co-hosts. Again, the ethos of Braver Angels is very much, we've had volunteers come to us with a podcast idea, and I'm like, great, hop on the mic, you can be our guest host. Again, so long as you're doing it within our spirit and within our model, that's what we want to do. It's a media network, so we'll have guest blogs, essays, videos. We have a new music committee that's working to bring conservative country music artists together with more progressive artists. And so we're really trying to develop an alternative to partisan media that can actually model what a cross-partisan discourse that is both constructive and interesting can look like. And that's, again, comes down to, we're not afraid of conflict, right? If you just bring folks together to be really polite and tiptoe around the issues and paper over the disagreements and let's just talk about where we agree, it's not very interesting. It's not very compelling. It's not provocative. We want to use conflict. We want to recognize the conflict and use that to bring people in, but then to show something that people won't see anywhere else, which is people actually finding that common humanity and building that trust. And once you do that, it becomes a lot easier naturally to find common ground, right? I mean, if me and you disagree on 90% of things, but we trust that each of us is coming in good faith, it becomes a lot easier to work together on that 10% where we agree, versus say that we actually agree on a majority of things, but we're suspicious and fearful about each other's intentions. We're not going to work together at all.
So you've got owned media that you're creating. You've got earned media where I see you getting good press pickups. Do you guys do paid media?
We don't. We have explored doing paid media, and maybe this is, some place where you can give us advice. We've been operating on a pretty shoestring budget. And so the vast majority of our efforts in the media space have been entirely organic. We've explored doing some paid media on Facebook, on Google, but we found more success in doing organic cross promotion, finding other newsletters that have big audiences so that we can sort of expose our work to a new audience. And if someone else has content that is relevant to our audience, we can sort of lift that up on our channels. And another thing I would like to do more of in 2021 is engage celebrities and influencers. So, if you're out there, celebrities listening to this episode, please do hit me up. In all seriousness, no, I think in the Trump era, the vast majority of celebrities were very much in just anti-Trump at all costs.
Right.
But I think now there could be an opportunity to break into some of these larger networks of influencers. And so for us, it's about finding the audience where they are. But to date, we have not been paying to do that.
Which is wonderful that you've made so much progress without doing that. And the interesting thing to me, so like we had Newt on toward the end of last year. And one of the things that he has, made a hallmark of his career is he knew as he was gaining power in the world that the media loves a fight. They can't resist it, and you've heard if it bleeds, it leads. Mm-hmm. And here you are promoting a product that is the opposite of the thing that attracts media attention, but you need to earn that media attention so that people will know what you're doing. How do you do that when the primary lever that draws attention is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve?
Well, again, that's why we really want to lean into conflict, right? So for example, this Thursday, we're hosting a debate, and it is about religious liberty versus anti-discrimination. So two things that there is conflict, right? And we'll have speakers who are evangelical Christians who, believe that private businesses should be able to deny service to LGBT customers because of their religious belief. And then we'll have LGBTQ speakers who are saying that you are fundamentally denying my human rights, right? So that's pretty conflictual. That's an interesting topic. But where else are you going to see those two sort of perspectives engage with each other in a way that is not just, lobbing insults over a battlefield, right? So we want to use the conflictual frame to bring people in, and then show how you can have, transformative conflict rather than destructive conflict.
Interesting. Now, there are so many facets to this and so many different ways to talk about it. Have you found a bumper sticker phrase or line that you feel like really embodies what you're trying to do and is easy enough for people to digest the complexity of it?
We haven't. We've had a lot of success with campaigns, sort of individual strategic campaigns that we can run. So last year, for example, during the campaign, during the election, our campaign was called Fight Right. And again, it was sort of leaning into conflict. Like we are having a fight, right? This is an election with enormous consequences. We need to fight, but there's a way to fight right, and there's a way to fight wrong. And then, in the lead up to the election and the aftermath of the election, when, violence first seemed like it could be a real possibility, and then, of course, was realized on January 6th, our campaign was called Hold America Together, or HAT for short. And we actually sold hats that said HAT, which should, appeal to the hipsters who want some irony. But that campaign, again, was really about holding America together, right? I mean, ultimately, the consequence of violence is a complete dissolution of our country. And then after the election, we had another campaign called With Malice Toward None. And again, as you can see, a lot of our ethos and messaging comes from Abraham Lincoln, from founding documents, because, again, we are trying to appeal to very different audiences. So we have to find language that doesn't alienate one side. And so we've thought about this frame in terms of how can we find things that are both patriotic and empathetic, that can sort of appeal to both reds and blues. And With Malice Toward None was about how do we, after such a vitriolic election season, try to let go of the malice that we have for those who voted differently from us, in the spirit of Abraham Lincoln after the Civil War, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. And right now we're sort of thinking about, what's next for Braver Angels. I mean, it's no longer an election year, but we do have the midterms coming up, and then we have the election in 2024. So in addition to the foundation and movement building, we really want to plug into the conversation. And I think that's why we're doing so much on this issue of voting and trust in our elections, because that really captures the crystallization of the zero-sum nature of tribalism, right? Each side now is basically accusing the other side of trying to steal the election, right? I mean, you have conservatives who are saying that widespread voter fraud is occurring, and that Democrats are stealing elections. And you have Democrats saying that Republicans are purposely trying to suppress the vote. I'm not passing a value judgment on either of those two things, but that is the reality that you have right now. And so we want to lean directly into that issue. How can we bring people together so that people, again, have trust in the most basic expression of democracy, which of course is free and fair elections?
Yeah, I'm going to read something from your pledge, where you said, we will not demonize or question the decency of Americans who voted differently from us. When we oppose their political views, we will say so with vigor, but we won't castigate them as persons. I thought that was a really clean, I mean, that felt like the essence of what we're all trying to do here. And one thing I saw, I looked at the list of signers and people and groups that are affiliated with Braver Angels, and there's a lot of individuals who are experiencing this day to day when they go to work, when they are spending time with their family. And then you've got some organizations that are kind of bent this way, groups like the NICD and so forth. As you think about your strategy to advance this movement, where do you see the constituencies that are the most eager to participate? For example, I know you have a lot of former politicians that have gotten on board. I don't see a lot of corporate America. Where are you finding that there's heavy interest, and what groups are you finding are the least eager to jump in?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a reason, for example, we've had an easier time attracting former politicians compared to current politicians. And a lot of that comes down to incentive, right? I mean, the way that our political system is structured is that it rewards division for a host of reasons, especially when it comes to the House of Representatives, because of the way the districts are gerrymandered. The only thing you really have to worry about is winning your primary. Once you win your primary, you're going to win the seat. And so you're really worried about appealing to the most, the real base of your party. And because of our current political system, that's very motivated by what people would call negative partisanship. And it's an interesting question about the business community. We've started doing more corporate engagement, basically helping businesses and sets of employees deal with the political issue, because obviously there's a lot of companies that are, have big budgets for diversity and inclusion, when it comes to race and gender and sexual orientation. But this issue of political diversity is pretty underdeveloped. But you have a lot of workforces that are politically diverse. And these conflicts are starting to bubble up. They come up in the boardroom. They're leading to worse outcomes for employee retention. And so we've had companies come to us, including some real big corporations, and say, can you come give a presentation to our leadership? Or can you make your skills courses available for our employees? It would be interesting to try to get business leaders to come on and publicly support Braver Angels. I think there's a lot of business leaders right now who are under a lot of pressure from the left as channeled through mainstream institutions. Particularly, again, it comes back to this voting issue. You saw a lot of the big corporations, whether it's Delta or Coca-Cola,
right,
or even Major League Baseball, take a strong stand against some of the bills that have been put forth in Republican legislatures. And so we want to break through and say, it's great for you to take a stand on these partisan issues, but let's also take a stand for our fellow Americans and for the fundamental values that hold us together.
Well, exactly. And, that's the route we're trying to take with Media Roundtable, is to say, look, media is a byproduct of business, and there is a major shift in corporations with the notion of stakeholder capitalism, right? So you've got the Business Roundtable, which controls all the money, and they basically came out with all these KPIs and said, okay, here are problems that we're going to try to solve in our society. None of them say anything about polarization. You've got a lot on climate, you've got a lot on social justice, and I'm not saying this to diminish any of that, but it's kind of are we paying attention to the fact that we are active participants in desolating the ground that we're standing on while we're trying to solve these other problems? And how do we get corporations to turn their attention toward this is very, very important. And what they're doing, as you're seeing, is it's either like Georgia, where they're making public statements, or, whatever the issue of the day is, corporations are now doing things that they're going to get told they're virtue signaling, and they're going to piss off a bunch of their customers, or, people might leave them alone. But, where I see an opportunity is to help them understand that polarization, as you say, affective polarization, is a real threat to the country, and it's a threat to their communities. It's a threat to their employees. Meanwhile, I guess in the spirit of workshopping with you here, I wish there was a kind of a product of Braver Angels for Business where you could help corporations. I mean, you saw what happened in the last couple of weeks with Basecamp, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where they took on all of they're getting a lot of respect, and and they lost a third of their employees because they said, we're not going to do politics here. We're going to stay focused on the mission of the business. Now, whether or not that's the right or wrong approach for them, I can't say, but I do know that it's indicative of the problem of the people just don't know how to contain this thing. And they need infrastructure. They need a way to be able to let employees express themselves and talk about things that are important to them without burning down the house. And so it seems like there's a real opportunity in that. And perhaps there are some ways that we can collaborate in trying to make that real. Meanwhile, when you talk about ad hominem attacks and the way that people do it, and you look at the media that's the most popular, we have this attention economy where that type of behavior is rewarded with dollars and with ratings. And how do you walk that back? It's a massive challenge that I don't think we can solve without dollars incentivizing people to walk it back. So I'm just, I guess if I'm asking you anything, it's how do we reach them and help them become increasingly aware that this is an important issue, commensurate with so many others that they're tackling?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I imagine it's something you might have thought specifically about more than I have. I think it comes down to trying to create some momentum, right? If you could get a couple of the big players in the space to give a little bit of cover, I think you could start to see a groundswell. But I imagine that a lot of folks, they just don't want to stick their neck out, right?
Yeah, it's the same reasons you were talking about with the Congress people. If they're active members of Congress, they don't want to do it. If they're former, that's fine. You can get a lot of former CEOs, but to get an active CEO, they don't even want to come near the issue.
Yeah, and one thing we found successful in Braver Angels is to try to bring to do things in pairs, to do kind of red-blue pairs. So, maybe get a company like Chick-fil-A, that's seen as pretty conservative, alongside I don't know what Chick-fil-A's blue counterpart would be, but get them together and make a statement together, because then it sort of gives it that credibility, where it doesn't seem like it's cover for a political agenda. It doesn't seem like it's letting one side off the hook, but it's here are two businesses or two leaders that have credibility within their own community, who can come together to take a stand on it. So I don't know how exactly that could play out in the advertising industry or whatever else, but that could be an interesting way of attacking it.
I think so. So I know we're running out of time here. Just imagine we have a lot of marketers that are listening, media practitioners. We also just have some folks that are interested in the topic. What advice would you give to all of them based on the work you do at Braver Angels for how they can do their part?
I think they should think about their fundamental values, right? I mean, it sort of comes down to that. I mean, if you're just thinking about bottom line or you're thinking about short term, in certain cases, then, it probably does make sense to take the polarizing approach. But if you're thinking about your deeper values for who you want to be as a person and who you want to be as a business, I think that will lead you more toward an approach like Braver Angels, which again doesn't require you to compromise your values, but does ask more. It asks you to summon something that's higher within yourself, which is where the original phrase "better angels" came from. And then also I'd ask folks to think long term, because I do think long term polarization is bad for not only our fabric and our culture and our relationships, but also bad for our economy and can threaten people's lives and livelihoods and can threaten business. So I think about values, think about long-term prospects, then I think it'll become pretty apparent, which decision and which direction you want to go in. And then thinking through, as you said, how can you do it in a way that is still compelling and still interesting and is still going to drive business? And that's an interesting challenge, and one that I think, both the Media Roundtable and Braver Angels will continue to explore.
Let's do it. Ciaran, thank you so much for your time and the work that you're doing. If people want to contact you, or at least follow the work that you're doing specifically, where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, well, you can shoot me an email. I'm at media@braverangels.org. Obviously, check out our website, braverangels.org. You can follow me specifically on Twitter if you like. I'm at Ciaran J. O'Connor. I'm not on Twitter too much because I find that when I do, my mental health starts to suffer, but I do tend to tweet things out about my work, about the work of Braver Angels. And the last thing I would say is check out our YouTube channel, because that's where you can really actually understand what it is we actually do. Not just talking about it, but actually seeing some of these debates and discussions and workshops in action.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you again for joining us. And you're doing really, really important stuff. And I just want to encourage you to keep it up, because it's everything we need. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm hopeful that your listeners will take something out of it.
I'm sure they will. Okay, we can stop there. I'll record the wrap up.
Okay.
All right, we are recording.
This show is dedicated to advancing our mission of mobilizing marketers to promote truth and civility in journalism. We value clarity, truth, fairness, respect, de-escalation, and tolerance, and we invite you to engage with us at MediaRoundtable.com. And if you found the show helpful and you're committed to our cause, please follow us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's always free. And if you're a marketer looking for support to live this out, you can get in touch with our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com, where you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Special thanks to Bianca, Kyle, Jennifer, the team at Podcast One, and T-Pain and Nappy Boy Entertainment for the music. Keep coming back.
All right, we're recording.
All right, can I pick it up from if you found the show helpful? Okay. If you found the show helpful and you're committed to our cause, please follow us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen. It's always free. If you're a marketer looking for support to live this out, you can get in touch with our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. Special thanks to Bianca, Kyle, Jennifer, and the team at Podcast One. Keep coming back.